What do you do when you have an underperforming board director? How do you remove a board member from the boardroom setting? It's quite awkward, and a number of scenarios can transpire. In the last year, I've had this conversation with a number of chairs where we've had to sort of come to the conclusion that the individual was not quite right for the organisation, and for a few different, quite compelling reasons. We had a scenario, first and foremost, with an older board member who was experiencing cognitive decline. And that was really quite challenging because the individual didn't recognise the issue, and it was quite a challenge, quite a sensitive matter to try and deal with that. Now, in that scenario, the chair had to really step in and have a number of conversations with that individual, and eventually it was agreed that it would be best that that person stepped off the board. But we are seeing an increasing level of that type of problem come into a boardroom setting, and keep in mind that we're often dealing with more senior executives who may be experiencing those kind of issues, and we're seeing early onset of things like dementia, Alzheimer's and so on in the community generally. So it's not uncommon that you may experience this at some point in your boardroom. The other two categories are the individual who is just not performing. So they're not turning up to enough of the board meetings. They're not prepared when they do turn up, and it's now noticeable and people are starting to recognise it. The best way to start to deal with that challenge is peer-to-peer feedback. Get your board members, your colleagues to start to comment, start to, draw attention to this matter. Approach the person directly. If several people approach that board member directly and start to pass that feedback back, this is starting to become a problem, Ted. You're turning up to these meetings, you're not prepared, you clearly haven't read the board papers. It's causing some problems, and providing that peer-to-peer feedback can be very powerful. It can turn the situation around, but of course, if it doesn't, then we have to step in and we have to ask that person to exit the board. And I would just be really matter of fact with it. It would appear that you just don't have the time to commit to the board, the level of work that's required. We've noticed this on a number of instances. X, Y, and Z has approached you on a number of instances to see if we could try and address the matter. Obviously you have a lot of other competing priorities. I think it would be in the best interests if we parted ways. 9 out of 10 times you're going to get an amicable result on that scenario if you've followed the correct sort of steps and protocols beforehand. Then we have the more difficult sort of scenario, which isn't as cut and dry, but we have the board member who's the agitator, the board member who, really sparks up the debate in the boardroom setting, but sometimes to the extent that it's causing high levels of disruption, really making it very difficult to get through the board meetings, taking things off topic constantly, having a very unpleasant demeanour. Now, that really is very, very challenging because it can create quite a difficult ecosystem for the entire board. And, sometimes the individual is more than aware of it and sometimes they're not. They might have very low EI, emotional intelligence, but often their heart's often in the right place. So sometimes they're agitating because they want to get change, they want to draw attention to certain matters, but then you get that sort of often that little category of individual who's just, a troublemaker, just loves to have an argument for the sake of an argument. Now, I hate to say this, but we get a few lawyers that fall into that category, ex-barristers. I used to date a barrister and, they would debate the colour of the toast in the morning if you gave them half a chance. So you do get individuals who have an inclination towards being a little bit more argumentative, just don't have the communicative skills to be able to find the consensus, and they're always looking for the personal win. Now, so you've really got to understand where that person's coming from, and the best way to do that is to have some frank and open dialogue, some conversations. Why did you behave that way in the meeting? Are you aware of the impact that your statements had? Are you aware that when you had that argument, you really sort of put, Janine offside? You've got to sort of draw, when it's fresh in everyone's mind, draw some parallels, provide some real life examples so that the person can hopefully commute. If it's becoming a real issue and you're getting multiple board members saying, look, this is really unpleasant, this is not constructive, we're not getting any really good outcomes out of this behaviour, this constant arguing, we're not reaching consensus, this person is actually taking us off topic. If that's happened consistently, probably up to the chair to step in then and, sort of really try and counsel that person and probably work towards an exit. The final problem is when you have a problem with the chair, and that is just that's the ultimate problem, really. That becomes quite a challenge. But I would still follow the same philosophies, okay? So communication is key, feedback is key, peer-to-peer feedback. So although the person might be the chair, you've really got to not revere that position to such an extent that you can't provide frank and fearless, feedback. Keep in mind your duty as a director is to the organisation itself, to the company, and, your duties as a director are very, very clear. And so anything that potentially derails your mission, derails your ability to make good decisions in the boardroom, including coming from the chair, you owe it to yourselves to provide feedback. It's always better if there's more than just one of you feeling that there's a problem. You have to have some consensus amongst other board directors, and you've got to look at a way to provide that feedback. I would initially try and nominate someone to take the chair offline and have a quiet, confidential conversation with that individual to see if there's anything going on for them. Is there any reason why certain behaviour is occurring or why that communication style isn't quite landing? Talk it through, then bring it back to the group, have another chat, then work out if we need to do a further intervention of some sort and try and reach again some consensus. At this level, most people are very senior, very mature, very experienced business executives. And I think once things are very clear, feedback is very transparent and things are being discussed very openly, sometimes even bluntly, people very quickly reach the right conclusions as to whether they should stay or go. And a request to go is almost always accepted unless there's some real underlying reason why that person's going to dig their heels in. If there is any form of performance or behavioural issue, if someone is requested to leave the board, they will in fact leave the board and they will try their best to sort of smooth things over and leave everyone's reputations intact, which is very important. So try and approach it from the basis of, if you were the person who was underperforming, if you were the person doing something that everyone didn't like, how would you like to be told about that matter? How would you like to receive that feedback? Try and incorporate that in your approach so that you get the very best possible outcome and everyone's relationships and reputations are preserved as much as possible.